2021 has only just begun, and wrestling promotions have already made sure we started off with a bang. Following an excellent 2 nights of Wrestle Kingdom from New Japan, all eyes turned to AEW for their first Dynamite of the year, New Year's Smash Night 1. And in the same week where New Japan had their biggest show of the year and had all the headlines, AEW managed to create a moment that left the wrestling world talking. And that moment, of course, is what seemed to be a Bullet Club reunion. But it wasn't just the fact that we saw a reunion of one of the most popular factions of the modern era in wrestling. It was how we got there and the long-term ramifications it might have on the wrestling world. These types of moments don't happen often in wrestling, especially not in the United States, where for the longest time there was only one major promotion who ignored absolutely everything that happened outside of their own bubble. And here you have AEW going against every rule in the book and doing wrestling in a way that's reminiscent of the territory days, but still fresh to a new, younger audience. This is Tranquilo Club, and this is a moment only possible in AEW. On the first Dynamite episode of 2020, AEW made sure to set the tone of how the rest of the year would play out. The people in charge at AEW made it clear, 2020 was going to be Jon Moxley's year. And that's exactly how it turned out. Jon Moxley ended up being AEW World Champion for almost the entirety of 2020. So if last year is anything to go by, we're in for a hell of a 2021 with AEW. For over a year, we heard people complaining that Kenny Omega wasn't being used right, that he was being booked poorly in AEW. But if you were actually watching the show, then you know that couldn't be farther from the truth. And I even made a video on this quote-unquote fall of Kenny Omega and why I thought it was always part of the plan. And if you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link to it in the description below so you can check it out. So this all led to AEW ending the year of 2020 in a big way. They had Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley facing off on Dynamite for the AEW World Championship. And it was on this night where a lot of fans finally got what they were clamoring for. Kenny Omega would defeat Jon Moxley, finally to become the AEW World Champion. But it came with a price. Kenny Omega had to turn heel and get help from Don Callis in order to defeat Jon Moxley. Because in the eyes of Omega, this was the only way. The only way for him to reach those heights that he once reached in New Japan. And as if that wasn't enough, we got another twist to end Dynamite on a hell of a cliffhanger. When the match was over, Omega and Don Callis ran straight to the parking lot as Alex Marvis chased them looking for answers on what just happened. That's when Callis dropped a bombshell of a line. He said if you want answers, tune in next Tuesday night to Impact Wrestling. Yes, Impact Wrestling, a competing North American wrestling promotion which Don Callis is a co-executive vice president of. What we were seeing here was 2 major wrestling promotions from the same continent who have TV deals starting a working relationship, something unheard of in the modern landscape of professional wrestling. In AEW's case, they had already set precedent for something like this. Earlier in the year, we saw them form a working relationship with the NWA, with the NWA women's title being defended multiple times on AEW programming, and which is now held by an AEW wrestler. And at this point, it became pretty clear to me what AEW's goal, what their vision was. AEW wants to create a shared wrestling universe of sorts, something sort of like the territory days. Because crossovers and working relationships like this benefit everybody involved, and it helps the wrestling industry grow. I mean, think back to All In, the show that Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks put together. That was basically the best from almost every wrestling promotion in the world on one big super show. Fans and wrestlers alike were brought together by this one thing, no matter where you came from. And that's AEW's goal as a promotion in the United States now. You bring in wrestlers from another promotion and they bring in their fans, and thus you grow a bigger audience. It makes sense. So when you see Kenny Omega, the AEW World Champion, show up on Impact Wrestling, well yeah, it's kind of a big deal. During his appearances on Impact Wrestling, Kenny Omega made it clear with both his words and his actions that he had reverted back to his cleaner persona. He showed a certain brash, cocky confidence that we hadn't seen yet in AEW. And you still have Don Callis with Omega, who together they form a pretty entertaining duo. And as it turns out, Omega says he came to Impact because he's a collector. He wants to collect every world title. He already has the AEW world title and the AAA world title, and now with Don Callis, he has an in to Impact to try to win the world title there as well. So by default, Omega and Callis have just put a target on the Impact World Champion Rich Swann's back. After his first appearance on Impact, Omega would also make an appearance the following week. He and Don Callis would be shown backstage watching a match between Chris Sabin and Machine Gun Carl Anderson, someone who Omega knows very well from his time spent in Japan, where they were both members of the Bullet Club. Anderson would win this match, albeit with a little cheating, while Omega was shown backstage celebrating like crazy. It's here where Impact World Champion Rich Swann confronts Carl Anderson about the cheating he did in order to win the match. And it's here where this heated exchange turns into an all-out brawl as Rich Swann gets help from the Motor City Machine Guns as they fight off Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows, another former Bullet Club stablemate of Kenny Omega. Omega sees this backstage in his trailer and he rushes to the aid of his old friends. Together they take out Rich Swann and the Motor City Machine Guns as Kenny Omega proclaims how about they put together the Bullet Club once again. And yes, he straight up said Bullet Club. The crazy thing is, when Kenny said he would be making an appearance on Impact for the first time, this is something we all imagined would now be possible. But to actually see it happen and for them to actually name drop Bullet Club was insane. Don Callis would then make it official right then and there. Kenny Omega, Gallows, and Anderson would take on Rich Swann and the Motor City Machine Guns at the next Impact pay-per-view, Hard to Kill. And even though Omega had all this going on Impact, he was still the AEW World Champion, and he still had business to take care of over at AEW, as he was scheduled to defend his world title on the first Dynamite of 2021 against Rey Fenix. So on New Year's Smash Night 1, we saw Kenny Omega and Rey Fenix go at it in an epic 15-minute match. If there was ever any doubt whether the cleaner had finally arrived in AEW, then this match put all those doubts to rest. This was Kenny Omega at his absolute best, and it paid off as he came out victorious in this match. And as if this epic match didn't already have people talking, it was the post-match that really set the wrestling world on fire. After the match was over, Omega would continue to attack Rey Fenix as Don Callis told him to finish the job. But then Jon Moxley, who earlier in the night had actually warned Omega that he would get even with him, came out with a barbed wire bat to attack Omega. And it appeared as if Jon Moxley was finally gonna get even, that is, until the Good Brothers came in through the crowd to help Kenny Omega. That's right, Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson, who don't even work for AEW, came to the aid of Kenny Omega, just as Omega had done for them over at Impact a few weeks prior. These two outsiders, while wearing their Impact Tag Team titles, were basically invading AEW, and they were ruthless with this attack. They helped Omega beat down Moxley with the barbed wire bat that he had brought in himself. Wrestlers who were sitting ringside even tried to get in and help Moxley, but the Good Brothers and Omega beat them down as well. This basically turned into an all-out declaration of war by the Good Brothers and Omega on AEW. And as the Good Brothers and Omega continued their onslaught on Moxley and the other wrestlers who tried to get involved, that's when the Young Bucks came out and had already seen enough. The Young Bucks, who are no strangers to the Good Brothers as they were also a part of the Bullet Club with them, approached them in the ring and basically asked them what the hell they were doing. But the big question here was whose side were the Bucks on? And while the Young Bucks were pleading with the Good Brothers, Griff Garrison and Brian Pillman Jr. tried to attack Omega from behind, but Matt Jackson and Doc Gallows saved him from this attack. It was here that all five men, who were sharing a ring for the first time in years since their days back in New Japan, all stared at each other and thinking, what is going on? It was here that Kenny Omega raised his hand and gestured for the Too Sweet hand signal, a hand signal that they were synonymous with back in their Bullet Club days. As Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson joined in on the gesture, all eyes turned to the Young Bucks to see if they would join in. The Young Bucks, still looking unsure of their decision, would join in on the gesture to close off the show. And we get an iconic image that will surely go down in wrestling history. So what's the significance of this moment? Well, for one thing, something of this caliber would not be possible if AEW wasn't so willing to work with other wrestling promotions. The fact that Gallows and Anderson are outsiders in this scenario makes it all the more intriguing. The fact that Kenny Omega is the AEW World Champion and he's jumping back and forth between AEW and Impact only adds to that intrigue. And now adding the Young Bucks, who are executive vice presidents of AEW and are AEW for life, really makes you start wondering, what are their motives? What's gonna happen? Are they really in it? Whose side are they on? And because of the Impact AEW dynamic, this means that neither promotion is safe from this group. Omega is an outsider in Impact. The Good Brothers are outsiders in AEW. And they're jumping back and forth without any consequences. But there's gonna have to be consequences. And this leaves the Young Bucks in a very interesting spot, as they're gonna have to choose if they're really Bullet Club for life or AEW for life. Or maybe the Young Bucks really are in this and someone else in AEW is gonna stand up to these guys. The popular theory is Hangman and the Dark Order. And if all 5 of these guys decide to show up on Impact as well, you can bet that there's going to be a group of wrestlers who are going to want to fight them off as well. We've seen a few failed and frankly half-assed attempts from other wrestling promotions to bring the Bullet Club to American TV. But this is truly the first time that it feels that the Bullet Club has arrived in America on a major network. This isn't like in other promotions where a trio of wrestlers have a shirt that kinda references their time in Japan and that's it. This is 5 former members who haven't shared a ring together in years finally reuniting in AEW, a promotion that actually embraces the wrestling that happened before it and that's surrounding it currently. And because AEW's vision of what they want wrestling to be, a big shared universe, this is possible. This wouldn't have been possible years ago, because there wasn't an AEW. And now finally, we have a major wrestling promotion in America that's willing to work with other promotions to create one of the most exciting wrestling angles in recent memory like this one. The Elite once said that they wanted to change the world. Well, I'm now convinced that they're well on their way to doing that, because without change, a moment like this would never have been possible, and therefore, it's a moment only possible in AEW.